So we're carrying on with Graham Ward here, and he lists his training and qualifications. There does seem to have been some more formal training in this case, but he does make a shocking admission that he actually doesn't think he ever found anything which pointed to, or might have suggested, the innocence of a sub-postmaster in any of the investigations that he was involved in. He also has some trouble, seemingly, with defining what a thorough investigation is, and also what pursuing all reasonable lines of enquiry means to him. Let's jump into the inquiry.
Can we go back and look at some of those jobs in a little more detail, starting with when you became an auditor in 1993 in the South East Regional Audit Team. You tell us that involved auditing branch accounts and undertaking various compliance tests. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
Did you have any professional qualifications when you became an auditor?
No, I didn't, no.
Did you receive any in-house training in order to perform the role of auditor?
Yes, it was on the job training, yeah.
So again, they're calling this stuff on the job training, whether there's any records, specific content to cover our assessment, I'm presuming not, as we've seen before. It does seem that even though he's worked his way to an even more senior role than the previous investigators that we've heard from, there does seem to be a lack of qualifications needed for the role or requested for the role at the time, as well as formal training in and of itself, which is a bit worrying.
What training did you receive when you became an auditor?
So, as an auditor, it was a case of auditing accounts of whichever branches we were going into, which involved counting cash, stock, and doing performance of all the various vouchers that were on hand. So, essentially, you were doing the same sort of job as you were as a counter clerk. So, it was just more of the same, auditing the entire branch.
Except that the decisions you are making as an auditor are potentially taking away people's liberty. That wasn't the case as a counter clerk, and I think that's the big part of the picture which has been missed, which probably explains the lack of training, because they're like, well, you've done this before. They've not. It's two significantly different roles. The processes of what you are going through day to day may bear some similarity, but when you have such power and control in your hands, there is need for careful training, qualification and experience to ensure that you perform that role properly, surely.
To some people's mind, an auditor may, or the title auditor, may convey a certain image. Would a fairer description of what you were in fact doing be a stock taking?
Well, we were counting all the cash, all the stock, all the vouchers that were on hand, and coordinating that into the office balance. So, yeah, I guess you could say that, yeah.
Now, in 1995, as you've told us, you joined the Post Office investigation team, is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
And the investigation team was part of the security team?
Yes, that's correct, yeah.
You were initially an investigation analyst, is that right?
That's right, yeah.
And you were line managed by a manager, is that right?
That was right, yeah.
And you tell us that you attended 2 weeks of formal training provided by something you describe as the Royal Mail training team.
Yeah.
And was that assessed training?
There was an assessment at the end of the course, yeah. It was a 2-week training course, and you had to pass the assessment to sort of pass out, as it were.
Right, so a slightly different experience to other people. He can identify some formal training. It's in-house, so whether those people have been trained themselves or similarly received on-the-job training is not clear. They're seemingly saying that it is assessed, so presumably, if he's assessed, he's met the standards that the post office have at least set. It's whether those standards are at an applicable level for the role that they were undertaking.
Did that training involve any external trainers?
No, they were in-house trainers.
And so there were no, for example, police officers or other people involved in the law enforcement business there?
No.
Did it involve any training delivered by external lawyers?
No.
Did it involve any training delivered by lawyers at all?
I don't remember any lawyers during that 2-week session coming to the course, but there may have been, but I don't recall.
What would you need a lawyer for? I mean, after all, the only part of your job is knowing the law.
In a subsequent part of your statement, you recall there being a training session about disclosure. Was that within the 2-week course, or was that a separate course?
I believe that was probably a separate. I don't recall it during that 2 weeks, but it was a long time ago.
Just jumping ahead a bit, you tell us that there was a job re-evaluation exercise. Is that right?
Yeah.
And when was that?
I think it would probably been about a year or so into the role. So I joined in 95 as an investigation analyst, and the job essentially was to support the investigation manager putting cases together. The evaluation that sort of basically you became an investigation manager, so we were just leading investigations at that point instead of supporting.
And so after that time, you were the first officer,
Yeah.
as it were, in any investigation?
Absolutely, yeah.
Did any...
I wonder whether that's an interesting turn of phrase there. You just became an investigation manager, because it seems like people ascended through these roles, some unknown criteria, shall we say.
training or anything else occur at that time, or was it just a retitling of your...
Just a retitling, there was no other training.
And do you know what the job re-evaluation exercise consisted of?
No, I've no idea. It was just retitled, and we were told that you're going to lead investigations.
Going back then to when you were the investigation analyst, in addition to the 2 weeks of training, was there a period of mentoring?
Yeah.
And who was that by, and how long did it last for?
So I was working to an investigation manager called Aileen Sobel, so she would have done the mentoring. There was another investigation manager at the time, Ray Pratt, who was there to mentor as well, and we would essentially be mentored by, or I would be essentially mentored by either of them.
Just seems like a bit of a conveyor belt of people who haven't received either any or little formal training over the time, then going on to mentor other people, rinse and repeat, ad infinitum, presumably.
It was ongoing.
Okay, and so that's sort of on-the-job training, is that right?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
You tell us in your statement that as an investigator, both as an analyst and then an investigation manager, you were required to apply legislation, including the Police and Criminal Evidence Act and the Criminal Procedure and Investigations Act.
Yeah.
Were you trained on the requirements of each of those pieces of legislation in the 2 weeks?
Yeah, it was covered in those 2 weeks, yeah.
To what extent, though, if it's not been covered by a lawyer, as far as you can remember? Surely you do need somebody who's a knowledge and experienced expert in that area to be able to advise you appropriately on it.
What about the codes of practice issued under each of those pieces of legislation?
Such a long time ago, I can't recall, to be honest, but we had the codes of practice books within our tackle kit, so you'd have a kit that you would carry around with you, so the codes of practice were there.
In hard copy, you carry them around?
Yeah, in hard copy, yeah.
And you tell us in your witness statement that there was an intranet site as well?
Yeah, there was an intranet site, yeah.
Were the acts and the codes issued under them on the intranet site?
I can't recall.
Did you, whichever in hard copy or in electronic form, often have recourse to what the relevant legislation or the code provided?
Not that I can recall, no.
What was the purpose of carrying them around?
Well, just in case you needed to refer to them.
And in your years, and I suppose we're looking now between 1995 and 2001,
yeah,
when you became the policy and standards manager, in those 6 years, there wasn't the occasion didn't arise that you ever needed to consult them?
Not really, no.
Surely that's quite unusual. I mean, it kind of maybe smacks of you don't receive proper training on it in the first place. You don't feel like you have to refer to them, but it feels like almost as ingrained practice there, because surely even a professional who's qualified and experienced and working with the law day to day, I would imagine that lawyers are constantly referring to the various legislation that is involved in certain cases, code of practice, to make sure that they actually get things right.
In relation to your training, either the 2 weeks at the beginning or the on-the-job training, Did that cover disclosure duties?
Not that I can recall. I do remember at some point there would have been some sort of disclosure training, but I can't recall the details now, I'm afraid.
So again, we're hearing from Graham Ward, similar to other witnesses, that they're kind of aware of this duty of disclosure, but can't really recall any specific training on it. It is a long period of time, but it does seem a really critical element if you are involved in building a case of someone, that you're aware that what you have to disclose to the defence when you are accusing somebody of a crime.
Asking you now, what would you say is the duty that's owed by an investigator in relation to disclosure?
Anything that undermines the prosecution or supports the defence.
And what must happen to such material?
It needs to be disclosed within your case file.
And when you say it needs to be disclosed in the case file, is that in the file that's going to go up to the lawyer?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. With various appendices to each case file. So, yes, he would disclose whatever within that.
And when you were constructing a case file, and there was material that undermined the proposed prosecution case or supported that of the suspect, how was that material provided to the lawyer?
I didn't have that many cases that went to prosecution.
In the 6-year period?
Yeah. There weren't that many. If there was material that needed to be provided, it would have been in hard copy in the case file.
I deliberately asked an open question there because one way of providing disclosure to a lawyer and then to a defendant is to list it.
Yeah.
To say there's document A, document B, document C.
It would be on a schedule within the appendice.
Another way to provide disclosure is to provide the documents to the lawyer in a big pack.
Yeah.
Which of those methods was used in your branch of the post office? There
would have been a schedule of the documents if there was anything, but I don't recall ever having anything that would have undermined the defence, supported the defence, sorry.
So presumably that means that he believes then all the cases that he's been involved with at least are perfectly valid and still holds that feeling, because he's never found anything that would undermine it. Now, is that because it was never looked for? Because we've seen some glaringly gaping things, notably things like transaction records in the case of theft that weren't even requested at the time. So is it a case of nothing was handed over because we didn't even look for it, or is it a case of we genuinely actually looked as hard as we could for all evidence to come to a fair conclusion, and actually we never actually found any, which seems unlikely when you consider the things that we know now about the post office scandal and the number of people that have been wrongly accused and sadly wrongly convicted.
Again, this is in this 6-year period.
Yeah.
95 to 2001.
Most of the cases I dealt with were pre-Horizon. So it was manual balancing within the branches for the most part. And I don't recall having any cases at all that involved Horizon.
I'm going to come on to that in a moment, because your time in investigation straddled the introduction of Horizon.
Yeah, it did. Yeah.
But just looking at it generally at the moment, you're saying in this 6-year period, you don't recall ever coming across a document that undermined the prosecution case or helped the defendant?
Not that I can recall, no.
The only material that you found proved guilt?
Yeah, from what I can recall, yeah. I mean, it's such a long time ago, but yeah, I don't recall anything like that.
What about your training on pursuing reasonable lines of inquiry? Can you recall what that was?
No, I mean, the training was to pursue all reasonable lines of inquiry. I mean, to do a thorough investigation, and that's...
They are kind of aims and conclusions, though. You've got to have a real grasp and understanding of what that actually means. So it'll be interesting to see, if we hear from him, what in his mind actually is meant by pursuing all reasonable lines of inquiry, and what is actually meant by him when he says he knew he had to do a thorough investigation.
and that's what we tried to do.
And what would you understand that to mean, a thorough investigation?
Well, yeah, that's a difficult one.
Should not be difficult, you would have thought. I mean, maybe you need a bit of time to think about it, but there you go. We would always run the thorough investigation. If you don't know what that actually means, then there's no way to have any confidence that a thorough investigation ever took place.
Would it include actively looking for material that might help the suspect?
Yeah, I guess it would, yes, but...
You guess or you know?
Yeah, I'm not guessing. It's been such a long time since I've actually conducted an investigation. You know, if I could refer it to a specific type of inquiry, it might be easier for me to tell you what I would be looking for.
It seems we could possibly take that as then, no, okay, that wasn't pursued, because until Jason Beer suggested to him maybe actively looking for evidence of innocence, which you would think would be part of any thorough investigation, there's a difference between not coming across any evidence of innocence, almost having things fall into your lap and not that never happening, versus actively pursuing alternate conclusions, which does seem to have been a wide-ranging issue at the post office and various organisations connected to the Horizon IT system and the prosecution of so many sub-postmasters. Nobody is very clear on the fact that they actually ever looked and explored and entertained alternate conclusions from the very outset.